In this video, we're going to focus on the bone creation and bone placement when creating a rig for a wing. And more importantly, we're going to focus on what kind of setup we can use when creating a control rig for a wing. We're going to use only the existing techniques that we already know. So it's just simply to kind of introduce a way of thinking about solving a problem like this. So let's begin. First, we can just simply follow the structure of wing and how the wing bones are set up. And you should simply remember what we talked about in the slides and in the lecture, and that's that the wing is a highly specialized arm, nothing else. So as such, it has all bones of a normal arm as well, such as the upper arm, lower arm, wrist, and the fingers. Depending on the structure, this is kind of like a bat wing, but it also has the membranes stretching between each of the fingers. And usually in a bat, we've learned that the membrane would stretch down to the wing, to the legs, and basically create a gliding surface that way. But the design here was kind of stretching this membrane into, down to the tail and kind of into the muscle structure. So not really the happiest of the designs, but it works. It looks cool and it's functional enough, and that's one of those compromises that we talked about. As far as the bone structure goes, it's simply a matter of keeping in mind, again, that it's a highly specialized arm with all of the arm elements, including the fingers, and then place the bones where they need to be placed. It's perfectly allowed to add roll bones as well, but that will significantly complicate the rig that's needed, because that's a bit more advanced than we can cover in the course. However, for the setup that we already have, we can now focus on creating the needed elements for this one. So let's now just focus on it being an arm. So we can just set up everything that we already would set up normally for an arm. And we know that that would be first would be an HI solver for the arm itself. And we have the wing moving like an arm. The next element, this is a control that I'm going to use later on, and for now I'm simply going to link it to the wrist bone so that it follows the wing where it needs to. Now, an additional element that we're going to add is IK solvers for each of the fingers, simply because it allows us for a better type of control. So it's the same type of procedure. It's animation, IK solvers, and we're simply going to add an IK solver for each of the fingers. And once that is done, we have now individual control over each of the fingers. So when that happens, you can simply slide to the time frame and the IK should work. So we can bend the fingers and they work fine. So that's the beginning of it, but now we need to start adding the control rig elements, and we're going to use the helper point. And first we're going to be needing a few of these, so one for each of the fingers, and I'm going to use a box without the cross and maybe, let's say, size 30. So I'm going to use one for each finger, one for the wrist, and I'm going to need a few more later on, but for now let's set these up. So what we need to do is now some aligning, so I'm simply going to align each one to the bone where it needs to be, and I'm going to align the position and rotation as well for the wrist, for the tip of the finger, and I'm using the tip of the finger, the bone, not the IK, that's important, so that you have the correct orientation of the dummy helper in relation to the finger and the wing itself. Alright, so we have these set up, and as before, we are going to link the IK solvers to their respective control dummies. This is simply to have all of the control that's needed on this rig element, so that we don't have to switch between IK solver and anything else. So now when you check, it behaves as it should, and we've effectively eliminated the need to hunt for these little solvers. Okay, so far so good. The next thing that we're gonna have to add is this is now for the specific control that I would like to introduce here, and it's now we can talk about this one. You can see we have an arc and we have an arrow. The arc is simply a visual representation and it doesn't do anything. It's simply there to look pretty. The one that we're interested in is this little arrow, and you'll notice that its pivot point is centered to and oriented to the wrist, so that when we start rotating it, it rotates around that arc. The idea is to rotate this arrow and use that rotation to bunch the fingers together or fold them together and spread them apart. And that's like a simple control over the wing shape and how your wing will perform. Instead of controlling each of the fingers individually, you can actually set up this kind of control this way. So what we want to happen is basically we want this to rotate or move this way, left or right in relative direction, and also this in left and right in relative direction, etc. So this is where the trick part comes in. Basically what we're going to do, we're simply going to add 3 more points. I'm going to make them smaller this time, so 1, 2, 3. And each one of these is going to be used to control the root of the finger. So we have the tip already controlled, but we need the root as well. So for now, I'm simply going to align them to the root of each finger. Align position and orientation, all of them. Oops, this was there. And the last one here. Alright, so now we have them aligned here. And now we need to do some clever hierarchy use. So in order to have this kind of control, ideally what should happen is that I can rotate this guy and this one follows. I should be able to rotate the root of the bone or root of the finger, and the tip of the finger follows. Now there's many ways that you can do this, but the simplest one is often the best, and that's by using a hierarchy. So I'm simply going to link the tip of the finger to the root of the finger, and we're talking about the control rig. No bones, no nothing. We're simply talking about the control rig elements. So I'm going to link this here, and because the fingers are part of the hand, they need to be also linked to the wrist. So now when I test stuff, alright, now we're getting somewhere. And if I take my root finger, there we go, this works. This is pretty much exactly what we wanted to do. Now you may be wondering, like, why? What's the whole point? Well, we're getting to it. So we have this kind of behavior set up. Now all we need to do is to constrain the rotation of each of the finger roots to the rotation of this guy. And then we can simply switch and adjust how much is each one affected by the rotation of the master arrow or master controller. So I'm going to select each of the finger roots and assign a constraint, orientation constraint. I'm going to constrain it to the arrow, keep initial offset, I'm going to select the middle finger, constraint, orientation constraint, constraint to the arrow, and I have experimented with these values, so I know them now already. So I know that 75 is a good value for the middle finger, and for the inner finger I'm going to use an orientation constraint, constrain it to the arrow, keep initial offset, and 25 was a value that worked well here. So now what happens is when I select the arrow, it affects the rotation of each root of the fingers, and we get the spread and bunch up effect. And this allows for a very nice fine control over all of the axes that we want, so you can actually have fine control over the flight. Let me just hide the mesh here because it's not skinned in this instance, but you can see, let's see, from here. So if you just start having very nice fine control over how the wing fingers are behaving. And now when that's combined, so you can actually use it in all axes, so you can see how this is beneficial. And since we have created an effective hierarchy, this means that it follows as it should. So we have effectively a wing that works. Now one thing remains. You can also change the hierarchy so that the finger roots are actually linked to your wrist bone instead of the wrist dummy. And what this will allow is that when you when the wrist moves, that the fingers are always attached to it. It depends what kind of setup you prefer, so you can simply rotate the entire hand, if you will, and you can see that the control as well is linked to it, so you have full control over how the fingers behave. Coincidentally, this is the same method that you could use on a humanoid character as well, to strike up poses, maybe to spread fingers or bunch them together and things like that. So it's a multi-purpose kind of thing. But the main importance here is to remember that we're using only the techniques that we have already learned before, and this is simply showing you how you can use the power of hierarchy and just thinking about a problem and solving it in different ways. So this is one way of creating a wing setup, which offers a very nice type of control so that you can strike good poses.